The sky had forgotten its warmth. Dark clouds rolled in slow procession across the heavens, like an old army retreating into memory, burdened and beautiful in their sorrow. Rain whispered first, a hush across the meadow grasses. Then it came steady, like breath from a giant unseen creature exhaling its grief. In a small cottage, nestled between two hills, half swallowed by creeping ivy and moss, a child named Lynn lay asleep. The wind sighed through the cracks in the shutters, and the fire in the hearth had long since become embers. Trees bowed to the invisible hand of the gale, their limbs dancing in frantic surrender. Lynn's golden curls caught the faint light leaking in from the window, glowing like a candle about to flicker out. But still brave against the dark, he wore a crown made of bluebells and slept beneath an old oak that spoke in echoes. In this dream, the storm was gentle raindrops landing like kisses on his cheeks, thunder purring like a distant drum in celebration. Here, the world did not hurt. Here, the skies broke only to show what lived behind them. Stars, waiting patiently like old friends at the door. Yet inside the cottage, time moved differently. Soft, dreaming, wrapped in hush. It was a journey, a wandering of the soul through places the waking world could not touch. And somewhere beyond the clouds, the sun watched over him, not as a god, not as a watcher, but as a friend. If you liked it, please consider giving it a thumbs up. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe and never miss an update. And the world around him knew to wait, because sometimes in a life filled with noise and rushing and fire, there must exist a quiet sanctuary, a place where even the wildest storm bows down, where a child can sleep beneath a bruised sky and be guarded not by walls or soldiers, but by the hush of the earth itself. Some are meant to hold space for sorrow, for memory, for sleep. The river that had swollen with grief now shimmered under a new light, pale gold, like honey spilled from heaven. Something had been kept safe here, not hidden, not shielded, but held gently, like a memory too precious to speak aloud. Like a poem written in silence. Inside the cottage, the embers had finally died, but the child still slept, and from above, through a clean, cracked window pane, a single beam of morning sunlight reached in and touched Lynn's brow. He smiled. Not a wide smile, not a waking one, but the kind you see on those who have met something beautiful in their dreams. And this one, sensing the sacred stillness inside the cottage, began to hush its voice. The wind slowed. The trees began to right themselves. The rain grew softer, more like a lullaby, and the thunder drifted farther and farther away, like an old storyteller walking home after a tale well told. The fields had grown wild. The well had moss on its stone lip, and even the foxes passed by with a quiet nod of respect. It had traveled far, across oceans and deserts, carrying voices from lost cities, the scent of old books, the rustle of forgotten letters. It searched for places where time had softened, where grief had not yet hardened into stone. And here, in this little forgotten hollow of the hills, it found a but it did not wake him. Instead, it circled the cottage like a sentinel, howling not in menace, but in mourning. There was something sacred in the way the child slept and bothered, like a secret kept by the earth itself. But Lynn's breath was slow, and even untouched by the storm's restless fury. Outside, the world was an orchestra of thunder and wind, of leaves torn from branches, of shutters clapping like forgotten hands. The bed was small and carved from cedar wood, a quilt stitched with stars and moons by hands long gone covered the sleeping form. No one knew how long Lynn had been alone. The world outside no longer came calling. The storm was no ordinary storm. Lightning streaked the sky, illuminating the twisted limbs of trees like skeletal arms reaching upward, pleading, and in one brief flash, the world became a photograph taken by the gods, an eternal moment of pause. Lynn stirred, but only slightly. A hand twitched beneath the quilt, fingers curling as if catching something unseen. In dreams, He was walking through a field of paper birds, their wings rustling softly, like lullabies, sung in a language only clouds could understand. Back in the waking world, the storm began to tire. It had raged long and hard, but not every storm is meant to destroy. By morning, the world was soaked in silence. Dew clung to every blade of grass like silver teardrops. The hills breathed again. A white fox watched from the tree. A lark sang softly from a broken Even the flowers battered by the storm tilted their faces upward. The lynn would wake, perhaps not today, perhaps not even tomorrow. But sleep was not absence for him. Beneath a stormy sky, he slept still, not unaware, not lost, but gently. If stories are currency, then you're the richest person I know. Thank you for giving your time to this story. I am certain there are many definitions for what it means to be awake. But if I had to give mine, I would say it being able to feel the difference between a question that wants to be asked and the one that needs to be. In the cradle of the valley, the storm had left behind a hush, the kind that clings to empty churches and snow-covered fields. Nature was quiet now, not because it feared the return of thunder, but because it remembered, and remembrance has its own silence. And so, where the wind softens and the world holds its breath, the days pass, like drifting clouds slow, silent, and unsure if they belong to time at all. A stillness surrounded him, not heavy, but deep like the pause in a lullaby, just before the final note is sung. Some said a child lived there, asleep through summer and snowfall alike. Others claimed the storm had carved a sacred silence into the hills and that waking him would break it. And some are the soil in which the world begins again. And far above, the stars, who had never stopped watching, leaned in a little closer. It can leave you feeling lost. It can leave you feeling lost. But sometimes getting lost is exactly where we need to be found. Are you feeling lost? Do you need to find yourself? Well, why don't you try a different approach? You can learn more about yourself by exploring your dreams. Share your dreams with us by tagging us on social media. Let's get lost together. She stayed through the night, repaired the shutters, played the flute until the stars came out to listen. She did not ask him to wake. She only watched over him as the earth once had. Outside, the first fireflies rose from the wet grass, blinking like thoughts not yet spoken. And inside the dream, Alian stood once more on the glass shore, the sea stretching out before him, the moon hanging low, waiting. This time, he felt a hand in his warm, small, familiar. Moray, not a stranger, but the name of home. And in that joining, something stirred not in haste, but in readiness, like spring curling its toes at the edge of winter, like dawn pressing gently on the shoulder of night. But no one dared venture close, except one. Her name was Moray. She had walked from the edge of the distant woodlands with a satchel of dried herbs, a carved flute tied to her belt, and questions in her heart she could no longer silence. The storm had taken her brother years ago, or so she believed, and dreams had recently begun calling her back to this place, to a name that rang in her chest like a bell. Each morning, the sun would peer in, uncertain whether to wake or to simply witness. And still, he dreamed. The cottage stood like a forgotten verse of a lullaby, draped in moss and gentleness. Birds did not flee at her approach. Even the fox that watched her steps gave no warning cry. She paused at the threshold. The door, old and tired, swung open with a sigh. Inside, the air smelled of cedar, sleep, and something ancient like rain that had never touched the ground. And in the quiet center of the room, he lay, just as the story said. Elion, her breath caught. He had not aged, not in the way time demanded. He looked like a boy made of quiet suns and old songs, a boy who had fallen asleep the day the world broke and never heard it shatter. She knelt beside the bed, unsure whether to speak. Her fingers trembled above his brow. Elion, she whispered, her voice the softest note. His eyelids fluttered, not like waking, like listening. The room held its breath, and in that moment, between the hush of dusk and the flicker of returning life, The storm that had once shattered the sky sighed its last breath miles away and was gone. Animals returned cautious at first. A stag stepped softly near the cottage, ears alert, eyes wide. Birds built nests beneath the broken eaves. The wind, now gentler, carried petals instead of warnings. Even the brook, once swollen and raging, babbled a song again, like a child resuming its game. And beneath the quilt, Elian breathed in harmony with it all. Elian still slept in the cottage, with ivy for curtains and earth for foundation. This time, his dream took him to the sea, not a real sea, but one that shimmered like glass and whispered stories instead of waves. He walked barefoot on a shore, made of stardust, the sky above shifting through hues of ink and violet. Here, the storm was a memory in the wind, not a threat, but a story retold in soft tones. Elian said, a voice like the turning of pages. "Do you remember why you sleep?" The boy turned to see a figure made of mist and moonlight. Her hair flowed like fog over mountaintops, and her eyes carried the weight of ages. "I think I'm waiting," he said, without hesitation. "But I don't know what for." The figure nodded. "Then rest. Waiting is not always empty. Sometimes it is where the world prepares to become something new." Back in the waking world, the forest that bordered the valley began to shift. The villagers, long vanished from the valley after the first great storm, spoke of the cottage as a ghost place. She reached the edge of the clearing, just as dusk painted the sky in bruised mauve and fading gold. Mireille wept then, not because she had found him, but because she understood. Some sleeps are not escapes. Some are journeys. Beneath the stormy sky, Elian still slept, but something in the dream had begun to open. It can be intimidating to make sense of a dream, especially when it seems to hold pieces of a puzzle you don't have. We all carry our hurts inside, don't we? Some hidden, some worn like scars. Today's video is for those wounds that won't quite heal, that ache even when the world looks beautiful. For those of us who've known a pain so big it seemed like the world was ending, but who found a way to keep going anyway. For anyone who has ever had to endure an endless night, this is the playlist for you. Let's get right into it. A while ago, I read an incredible book called The Starless Sea by Aaron Moore. Years passed. Flowers bloomed and faded. The leaves turned and fell. But Eliana never found a reason to smile. Curia! She tracked the music to a hidden clearing, where she found a young man seated on a moss-covered stone. His name was Elias Starfire, and his melody was filled with such life, such hope, that Eliana found herself drawn to it. She told Elias of her river godfather's stories, of a world beyond the hills where stars twinkled and flowers drank in sunshine. Yet every morning when the sun rose, Eliana found new strength in the melody Elias played, and Elias discovered courage in the unwavering hope that shone from Eliana's eyes. They helped each other bear the weight of their pasts, until finally, after many months, they reached the top of the highest hill. Eliana learned from Mireille how to mend dreams, how to soothe troubled hearts, and guide weary travelers back to themselves. Elias, in turn, shared the stories of the outside world, of sunlit meadows and moonlit skies. Together, they wove a tapestry of healing, strengthened by their love for each other. And the music they played, before them stretched a valley bathed in the soft, golden light of dusk. Before them lay a meadow bathed in the golden glow of sunset. Hand in hand, they retraced their steps, walking back into the Whisper Wood. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed today's tale, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Until next time, may your own journeys be filled with music, magic, and the courage to seek the light. The darkness did not seem so oppressive now. The whispers of the wind no longer carried tales of despair, but of hope and resilience. They reached the clearing where the cottage stood, bathed in the soft light of the rising moon. As they stepped inside, Mireille, whose eyes twinkled with pride, greeted them. "So you faced your fears," she said softly. "You deserve the light now." She led them to the hearth, where a small mirror hung above the flames. "Look," she said. Eliana and Elias turned to each other, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. And in that moment, they saw not just a reflection of their physical selves, but of their spirits, too. Their eyes shone with newfound clarity, their smiles brighter than any star in the sky. Wildflowers swayed in the gentle breeze, their colors as vivid as a painter's palette. And in the distance, tall mountains pierced the clouds, their peaks kissed by the warm light of the setting sun. "This is the Sunlands," Elias whispered, awe in his voice. They stood there for a long time, soaking in the beauty around them, letting the sun's warmth fill their hearts. But though Eliana and Elias were content, a part of them still yearned for the light and warmth of the sun. One day, Eliana confided this longing to Murray, who listened with a faraway look in her eyes. "There is a way to see the sun," she finally said. "But the path is perilous, and the price great." She explained that beyond the whisper wood lay the Sunlands, where the sun shone bright and clear. But to reach it, they would have to cross the Bridge of Sighs, a place where one could confront their deepest fears. The sky above shimmered with stars, the rivers sparkled like scattered diamonds, and the trees whispered secrets to the breeze. Eliana gasped, tears brimming in her eyes. Hand in hand, they walked into the shadowy depths of the whisperwood, where twisted trees clawed at the fading light. But with each step, she confronted these fears, acknowledging the pain they had caused her. Elias, too, faced his demons, the villagers' scorn and his own doubts. Yet he pressed on, his heart pounding in his chest, driven by the dream of seeing the sun. The bridge shimmered and pulsed, reacting to their emotions. With every sigh of fear, it shook. With every step of courage, the deeper they went, the darker it became, and the whispers of the wind grew louder, weaving tales of despair and loneliness. Eliana and Elias clung to each other, drawing strength from their shared hope for the sunlit clearing. They walked for what felt like hours, the oppressive darkness testing their resolve. Finally, they emerged from the trees onto a vast plain. Before them stretched a bridge made of swirling mist, shimmering with 1,000 colors. "This is the Bridge of Sighs," Morea had told them. "Each step will reveal your deepest fear. Only by facing them can you move forward." This was the world her father had spoken of, the world that resonated with a song in her soul. She raised her flute to her lips and played a single note. The sound echoed in the valley, swirling around her, mingling with the evening song of the hills. Elias joined her, his flute weaving around hers. Like a lover's embrace, their music rose together, blending into a symphony of light and hope. Together, they decided to find this world, to seek a place where Eliana could hear the music in the wind, and Elias could see the stars in the sky. Its windows glowed with warm light, and the scent of honeysuckle spilled out the door. Eliana knew instinctively this was their home now. As they stepped inside, a woman turned from the hearth, her eyes deep pools of starlight, widened in surprise. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice echoing with ancient wisdom. "My name's Eliana," she replied, stepping closer. "And this is Elias. We were told to come here. We bring music to those who need it." The woman's expression soft. "Ah, yes," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." She gestured for them to sit by the fire. "I am Morea, and this is the place where dreams are mended." They packed their flutes and set off across the hills. He played until the trees swayed, until the birds swooped and soared, until the wildflowers bowed their heads as if in reverence. And when he finished, Eliana stepped forward, her starlight flute clasped tightly. "That was a beautiful song," she whispered. Elias looked up, startled. He had not heard her approach. "Thank you," he replied, his voice as warm as sunlight. "It is one my grandmother taught me. She called it Song of Patience." He paused, then added softly, "She used to say that sometimes the hardest thing is to wait for the right time to bloom." Eliana nodded, understanding. Waiting was something she knew well. But as the weeks passed, and she saw the joy Elias found in his music, something inside her stirred. It was a feeling she had long forgotten, a flicker of warmth in the cavern of her sadness. No matter how vibrant the world became, no matter how full of wonder, she felt empty, as if a part of her soul was missing. She wandered the valleys and hills, playing sad melodies that echoed her aching heart. Many nights she stayed by the river, staring up at the starless sky, hoping to see the one that had been her namesake, only to be met by the cold indifference of endless dark. It tells the story of Zachary Ezra Rollins, who discovers a mysterious book in his late father's belongings that leads him to a secret underground world. There he meets a cast of unforgettable characters, each marked by their own sorrows. But despite the darkness they carry, they find ways to make beauty. One day, Eliana noticed a sadness in Elias's music, a note of despair that tugged at her heartstrings. She asked him about it, and he told her of a village hidden in the hills where people lived in perpetual twilight, shielded from the world by magic, unaware of the light that painted the rest of the land. "I yearn to see the sun," he confessed, "but I also fear it. What if the brightness hurts my eyes? What if the light is all I have ever known?" And as he spoke, Eliana understood. To seek the light after living in darkness was both a blessing and a curse. A lone star shone down from the velvet sky, casting silver light upon the babe cradled by the river god Diber. The god held Eliana close, whispering tales of the world that was to be, of laughter and light, of flowers that drank sunshine and trees that danced in moonlight, of love that bloomed beneath a canopy of stars. But Eliana, nestled in Tiber's arms, could not hear his whispers, for she was deaf to everything except the wind's mournful song. And the wind carried a different story, one of loss and loneliness, of a mother who had loved too much, and a father who had feared the most. When the star in the sky died, leaving the world in darkness, the river god knew Eliana would grow up craving the light, so he gave her a gift, a flute carved from starlight, bone, and dreams. And he taught her how to breathe music into it, how to coax the sleeping world into listening. And this playlist was born. Today's story is the first in a series called Tales from Viridia. Viridia is the name of that underground world, and these stories are inspired by the mythical figures I imagined. Must have lived there long before Zachary arrived. This first tale is about endurance, finding hope in unexpected places, and the profound meaning of returning home. Let's dive in. The world was a whisper when Eliana Riverwind was born. She grew up in the hush of the riverbanks, playing her flute and watching the seasons paint the world in new colors. Then one day, a new sound reached her ears. Someone else playing the flute. Elias and Eliana played together every day, sharing songs from their pasts and hopes for their futures. Then an idea bloomed in her chest, taking root in the small space her hope had grown. Their journey was long and fraught with peril. They faced raging rivers, prickly thickets, and lonely nights. They found a small cottage nestled beneath the trees, near the river's gentle flow, and so Eliana and Elias made their home in the valley, bringing solace to those lost souls, seeking refuge in the quiet strength of music. Years passed, and the cottage became known as the Still House, a place where one could find peace and rebuild their shattered hopes. Despite the danger, Eliana and Elias knew they had to try. As they stepped onto the bridge, Eliana saw visions of her past, of her isolation, her grief, and the echoes of the river god's prophecy. When they reached the other end, hand in hand, the bridge dissolved beneath them, revealing a breathtaking sight. As the sky deepened into twilight, Eliana and Elias knew it was time to return. And that is the end of today's story. Thank you for watching. Would you like part 5 to explore the deeper meaning of the quiet ring? Or follow one of the children who finds healing there and carries it to a new place? You said, Beneath the Stormy Sky, A Gentle Sleep Part 5. The story continues with Where the Silence Blossoms. The first morning Ilian rose from his bed. The cottage sighed, not from age, but from relief, as if the walls had been holding their breath all these years, as if the floorboards, the windows, the quiet hearth all remembered the rhythm of footsteps and soft laughter, and now they welcomed it again. Elian stood by the doorway, fingers grazing the worn wood. The sky above was no longer storm-bitten, but pale with promise. The wind that touched his cheeks was the gentlest kind of remembering wind, not a warning one, Mireille watched him from the garden, her hands buried in dark soil as she planted tiny roots that would one day become food, or flowers, or both. She didn't rush him. She knew that waking from a sleep like that required time to become real. "I dreamed for so long," Elian said finally, stepping outside. "I know," Mireille replied, brushing her hands clean. "But some dreams are longer because they carry more." He looked out at the hills. The grass shimmered in sunlight. Birds nested in the arms of trees that had once bowed beneath the storm. Life was returning in slow, deliberate steps just as he was. I dreamed of oceans in the sky and bridges made of starlight, of voices I never met, but somehow knew. He turned to her, his eyes bright but calm. "Do you think it meant something?" "I think it still does," Mireille said. They sat together on a stone beside the garden, two shadows leaning into the morning. In the days that followed, the valley began to change not just in color or sound, but in feeling. It was as though the land had been holding grief for a long time, and now, with Elian awake and Mireille beside him, it could begin to breathe again. Children from distant villages began appearing at the edge of the woods. Not many, just one or two at first wandering without knowing why, drawn by some invisible pull. Some had been quiet too long. Others had stopped dreaming. Their eyes were dim, their voices careful. Elian welcomed them with stillness. He didn't ask questions. He simply offered space to sit by the fire, to rest beneath the sky, to let silence do what words often could not. And the children stayed, some for days, some for a single night. Some came back with seeds and songs and stories gathered from towns that had never known such peace. The cottage became something different. Not a house, not a refuge, a beginning. One evening, after the lanterns were lit and the air smelled of wood smoke and mint, Mireille found Elian staring at the stars. "You feel it too," he said without looking away. "Yes," she answered, "but some dreams are longer because they carry more. And now, you teach others how to listen again." He nodded, not with certainty, but with trust. The kind of trust that doesn't need to understand everything in order to begin. So they began, together. They walked through the valley, into the woods, down the old paths, carved by deer and time. They spoke not to change the world, but to hear it more clearly, to sit beside broken things without needing to fix them, to gather stories like fallen leaves and place them gently into the fire for warmth. In time, people came not just to watch but to join. They brought books they never finished, paintings left half done, songs they had been too afraid to sing. They brought memories, wounds, quiet longings, and slowly, a circle formed not of rules or sermons but of presence. It became known as the quiet ring, a place not to speak, but to be, where grief was allowed to breathe, where silence was not awkward, but sacred, where the sky stormy or clear was always welcome. Elian and Mireille never claimed to lead it. They simply kept the fire lit. They built no altar, raised no flags, but those who entered left lighter, as though they had placed something down they hadn't known they were carrying. One night, as spring returned once more, Mireille sat beside the old cedar bed. "Elian," she said softly, "do you think the storm will come again?" He looked toward the dark horizon, where clouds flickered with distant lightning. "Yes," he said, "but we're not afraid of it anymore." She smiled, and the rain began to fall, not in rage, but in rhythm, soft, steady, like a song returning home. I know I say this about every single one of my videos, but please do not forget to leave a like behind. This helps the algorithm, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. When the quiet reaches back, and if you want to see more content like this, then hit that subscribe button. It really helps me grow, and it lets me know that I should keep creating videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and let's move on to the next short. The valley remembered Luma in the way a lake remembers a falling star, brief, brilliant, and still echoing long after the light has gone. Now the old folks called her Sunchild, though she was nearly 70 summers. You could find her most mornings sitting on a weathered stone by the south wall, back ramrod straight, eyes half closed, face tilted up to drink in the light. One day, a young mother named Amara sat beside her. Sunchild saw the worry lines crinkling around the girl's eyes and asked kindly, "What troubles you?" "My baby brother," Amara whispered. "He doesn't follow the sun like we do. He sleeps when it's light outside and wakes when it's dark. I'm scared he'll wander away or get lost somehow." "Ah," Sunchild chuckled, a deep sound like rolling stones. "Your brother is following the moon." He hears her song. Later that week, when the moon hung fat and silver in the sky, Sunchild found Amara sitting on the roof, staring up. "Can he come back?" the girl asked, her voice cracking. "Your brother will always hear the moon's song," Sunchild said, reaching out to squeeze Amara's hand. "But the wind knows the way. It carries all songs to all ears. Even the smallest babe can hear the wind whispering stories between the mountains. Even the darkest night can't stop the winds. Soft paws patting on every rooftop. So long as your heart beats with the sun, the wind will bring your brother home again and again." And so it was. Every morning when the sun touched the rooftops, little Finn would wake. He would crawl to the highest point of the house and scream with delight. And every time, the wind would rush up to greet him, lifting the corners of his blanket and swirling it around him like a dancer. Then the wind would carry him away, over the hills, over the fields, over the river, until it deposited him safely in the waiting arms of his family. Over the years, Miri watched Finn become a man. When she was too old to leave her home, he would return from his travels, sit beside her on the south wall, and tell her all the stories the wind had brought him. As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows around them, Amara would come and sit on the step beside him, leaning against Sunchild's shoulder, until it was too dark to see the colors left in the sky. "He comes back every time," she'd whisper. "And every time I'm grateful for the wind." Sunchild smiled, feeling the last of the sunlight warm her eyelids. "Yes, the wind is a good listener," she thought. "It carries many songs, but it never forgets the way home." Elian sat by the old window now, watching mists roll down the hills like silver wool. He had not seen her in moons, but he wasn't worried. The quiet did not vanish. It carried, and Luma had carried it well. The wind, which once tore at the shutters like grief unchecked, now passed gently through the trees, whispering not of endings, but of messages in motion. That morning, a bird arrived. It perched on the garden post and dropped something into Moray's hands, a folded scrap of bark tied with a sliver of red thread. A letter, not ink, but etched with charcoal marks and finger-pressed symbol-style language. Ilion had taught the children of the quiet ring. Moray read it aloud. "Slowly, the seed has taken root. It rained 3 days ago, and I sang beneath it. The neighbors came. Not all, but enough to sit still. We built a circle. We call it the listening garden." She looked up at Elion, her voice shaking just slightly. A boy who hadn't spoken in 2 winters whispered a story to a broken chair. A woman who used to shout now hums when she walks. "The storms still come, but we don't hide anymore. We wait together." And at the bottom, drawn in soft lines, a picture of a single smooth stone placed in the middle of the garden. Planted, remembered. Elion closed his eyes and let the silence hold him. Luma had done what even many adults could not. She had carried stillness into noise and taught it how to soften. "She's a keeper now," Moray whispered. "A weaver," Elion added. They stepped outside as the clouds parted slightly, letting down a pale sunlight that felt more like memory than warmth. The garden swayed in the wind. The flowers bent their heads gently, as if listening. And in the following days, more messages arrived. A boy from the mountain village sent pressed leaves covered in chalk symbols. "We are planning a story." A baker from the eastern hills had painted her bakery walls with lullabies. People come just to stand beneath the words. A child from the desert carved a spiral in the sand and waited. Birds came. Then people. Then peace. The quiet had learned to travel, and it brought with it not silence not escape but a remembering of how to be near the world without rushing through it. Back in the valley, Elian and Marae gathered the letters, stones and drawings into a circle beneath the old oak tree. They called it the Quiet Hearth Knot, a monument, not a shrine, but a space to feel what had begun. Children sat there in the afternoons, tracing each symbol with their fingers, learning without being taught. No one gave sermons. No one asked them to believe anything. But all who sat there stayed just a little longer than they meant to. And in the evenings, Elian would look toward the horizon and whisper, "Thank you, Luma." Not because she saved anyone, but because she remembered how to carry something sacred and how to give it away gently. That night, he dreamed again. He stood on a high hill beneath the stormy sky. Not the one that once raged, but a new one, layered in purples and soft gold. Lightning flashed in the distance, but it did not roar. It shimmered like a lullaby being written in the sky. A figure walked toward him, Luma older now, taller, eyes still full of quiet fire. She stood beside him in the dream, looking out over 100 hills, each with a tiny, flickering light gardens, circles, songs, seed stones, quiet hearts in every direction. "You see," she said. Elian nodded. "The quiet didn't stay here." "No," she smiled. "It learned to listen somewhere else." If you enjoyed this video, then please consider leaving a like behind. The wind knows the way. Mary always followed the sun. When it rose, she rose. When it set, she rested. Thank you for watching, and see you later. This is the 37th time I've read this story, and every time my heart cracks a little. So let's talk about why. The lantern that found its way back. Years had passed. The valley had not changed in the way cities do. It did not rise in towers or hum with machines. It changed in softer ways, through stories left in stones, through songs sung by trees, through a kind of silence that deepened with each season and never felt empty. In it, they kept the letters, the drawings, and the seed stones sent from all over the world. Some were from people they knew. Some arrived with no names at all, just symbols, pressed flowers, or scraps of lullaby verses written in trembling hand. It's clear she holds a special place in the history of this place. But of small things. A shoemaker who began to hum again after years of silence. After a long absence, there's a gathering around a fire. She left a note by the window, pressed with a dried bluebell. "There are more places the quiet must reach, but I will return again." When the wind begins to listen, and by the time the sky turned soft with dawn light, she had vanished once more. But the grass where she walked now shimmered faintly, and the lantern beneath the oak glowed on no longer alone, but surrounded by other lights, a circle, a memory, a beginning that never ended. And the valley, it exhaled, a deep, slow, grateful breath, because it knew that wherever the storm might return, the quiet had already arrived first. This ending is both hopeful and melancholic. Luma's departure, while temporary, leaves a sense of incompleteness, making us wonder about the journey she's on and the challenges she might face. Yet there's a sense of continuity. The shimmer in the grass and the glowing lanterns symbolize the lasting impact she has had on the valley and its people. The story concludes with the valley breathing a grateful breath, acknowledging the cyclical nature of life, the ebb and flow of presence and absence. It's a reminder that while endings can be bittersweet, they also hold the promise of new beginnings and the enduring spirit of resilience and gratitude. The warmth of the fire mirroring the warmth of the stories being shared. And what makes this moment even more poignant is the type of stories being told. They're not epic tales, but quiet narratives of healing and growth. These stories resonate deeply with the characters and the audience, creating a sense of shared humanity and the universality of these experiences. Through these stories, they confront the complexities of human emotions and the challenges of everyday life with empathy and understanding. A boy who taught a village to sit in a circle without speaking. A grandmother who remembered how to say, "I'm sorry," by planting violets near her doorstep. Well, I think it's the quiet power of the story. It's not an epic tale of adventure, but a gentle exploration of themes that resonate deeply within us all. The story beautifully portrays the healing power of connection, the importance of self-discovery, and the transformative impact of embracing the quieter aspects of life. Moreover, the story reminds us that true strength lies not in silencing others, but in actively listening and acknowledging their stories and feelings. It's a testament to the human spirit's capacity for growth, understanding, and the pursuit of inner peace. This is a story that stays with you long after you've read it, nudging you to reflect on your own journey towards understanding and embracing the quiet depths within yourself and the world around you. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and check out more of my content. Thanks for watching. They all thought the quiet was outside of them, Luma said, staring into the flames. But it was in them all along. They just needed somewhere to remember, and you gave them that, Murray said. No, Luma replied gently. You gave it to me. She looked at Elian. You slept through the storm so I could learn how to stand in it. And Elian, eyes shining, simply said, thank you for waking up. Now, these stories that Luma shares are not fairy tales or grand adventures. They're simple narratives of everyday life. They deal with quiet moments of healing and understanding. I really like this contrast because it emphasizes that profound transformations can occur in the most understated moments. These stories aren't about sweeping changes or dramatic events, but about the power of small acts of kindness and self. For example, the shoemaker finding solace in music, the boy teaching a community the value of silence, and the grandmother expressing remorse through her violet patch. These stories highlight the healing power of creativity, mindfulness, and sincere apologies. Her reappearance stirs up a mix of emotions and the anticipation of the reunion. The potential revelations and the impact her return will have on the community is palpable. I find this moment in the story particularly interesting because it symbolizes the return of an essential part of themselves. Her absence had created a void, but now she is back, bringing with her the promise of healing, understanding, and a restoration of balance. They didn't need to know who sent them. The quiet knew, and it remembered everything. I love the cottage imagery here, the sense of home and continuity. But I think what truly stands out is this idea of the room filled with tokens of remembrance. Letters, drawings, seed stones. Each item isn't just an object. It's a vessel of shared experiences, emotions, and connections. These aren't relics to be locked away, but active elements of their lives. They don't need to know who sent these items. The quiet knows. And this quiet isn't an absence of sound, but a presence, a living entity that envelops and comprehends all. It's a profound concept of interconnectedness, suggesting that everything has a place and purpose within the grand tapestry of existence. Elian was older now, not old by the count of candles or clocks, but older in the way rivers become wise. He moved a little slower. He listened longer, a figure in a dark blue cloak, a lantern in her hand. Not a child, a woman now, taller, weathered by wind and wonder, but her presence struck the same note in the world that only a few ever did, a kind of stillness. It didn't hush things, but invited them to breathe. This is such a beautiful passage. The imagery is so vivid. The golden light as a prayer unfolding is a striking metaphor. And the arrival of this cloaked figure with a lantern is both mysterious and captivating. The description of her presence, not as something that silenced the world, but as something that invited it to breathe, is a wonderful touch, suggesting a harmony and interconnectedness with nature. I really like how the author describes her as weathered by wind and wonder. There's a sense of resilience, strength, and a life well lived, seasoned by experiences and insights gained along the way. And when he spoke, the wind often paused to hear him better. Mari still lived in a cottage with him. They had added a small room with windows that looked toward the hills. In it, they kept the letters, the drawings, and the seed stones sent from all over the world. Some were from people they knew. Some arrived with no names at all, just symbols, pressed flowers, or scraps of lullaby, verses written in trembling hand. They didn't need to know who sent them. The quiet knew, and it remembered everything. Then, one evening, as golden light stretched across the valley like a prayer unfolding, Elion saw someone at the edge of the field. A figure in a dark blue cloak, a lantern in her hand. Not a child, a woman now taller, weathered by wind and wonder. But her presence struck the same note in the world that only a few ever did. A kind of stillness that didn't hush things, but invited them to breathe. The first thing I want to talk about today is the image of the valley not changing in the way cities do. This immediately grabbed my attention because I live in a city, and there is this idea that rural areas never change. I think we tend to imagine the countryside as static, unchanging, which couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, rural areas experience change at their own pace, dealing with issues like gentrification, natural disasters, and shifting economies. Just like urban environments, what I love about this opening line is how it sets up the central metaphor of the story. Change isn't about physical transformation, but about softer, internal shifts, stories, songs, and deepening silences. Cities change by expanding, building up. This valley changes by looking inward, becoming richer in its quiet. Moray still lived in the cottage with him. They had added a small room with windows that looked toward the hills. Then one evening, as golden light stretched across the valley like a prayer unfolding, Elian saw someone at the edge of the field. The arrival of this character, who turns out to be Luma, rekindles memories of the past, hinting at a deeper connection between her and the valley. Later that night, they built a small fire. Luma told stories not of heroism or miracles. Later that night, they built a small fire. Luma told stories. This is such a powerful scene. The next morning, Luma rose. Before the sun, she didn't wake them. So why does this story crack my heart every time? I know we don't talk about this much, but I'm pretty sure there are some kids out there right now listening to our audio stories. And I want to send a special shout out to all of you. You know who you are. If any grown-ups are listening to, and you have a kiddo who loves stories, please tell them Happy Kiddo Storytime exists, and that you can subscribe to get new stories every week. Okay, storytime is starting. Once upon a time, there was a valley. Just an ordinary valley with hills, 4 sides, and a river for a heart. Nothing spectacular, except for what it held inside. It held the quiet hearth, a place where the very air seemed to understand the language of souls, and where trees listened to tears and rocks remembered laughter. Long ago, a young man named Elion stumbled into this valley during a raging storm. The quiet took him in, sheltered him, and when the storm was over, he stayed. Now, many years had passed. The valley had not changed in the way cities do. It did not rise in towers or hum with machines. It changed in softer ways through stories, left in stones, through songs sung by trees, through a kind of silence that deepened with each season and never felt empty. Elion was older now, not old by the count of candles or clocks, but older in the way rivers become wise. He moved a little slower. He listened longer, and when he spoke, the wind often paused to hear him better. Moray still lived in the cottage with him. They had added a small room with windows that looked toward the hills. In it, they kept the letters, the drawings, and the seed stones, sent from all over the world. Some were from people they knew. Some arrived with no names, at all just symbols, pressed flowers, or scraps of lullaby, verses written in trembling hand. They didn't need to know who sent them. The quiet knew, and it remembered everything. Then one evening, as golden light stretched across the valley like a prayer unfolding, Elion saw someone at the edge of the field, a figure in a dark blue cloak, a lantern in her hand. Not a child, a woman now taller, weathered by wind and wonder. But her presence struck the same note in the world that only a few ever did, a kind of stillness that didn't hush things, but invited them to breathe. Moray came to the doorway beside him. Their eyes met. Luma Moray whispered. The name passed through the air, like smoke curling from a sacred fire. They did not run to her. They waited, as they had always done for arrivals to unfold in their own time. Luma crossed the meadow in slow steps. The grass bowed beneath her. The lantern in her hand glowed not with fire, but with a soft white light made, perhaps of moon water or memory. When she reached them, she smiled. "Hello," she said, and her voice was unchanged still, carrying that hush between stars. Murray embraced her first. Elian stood nearby, his eyes bright with a quiet that had waited years to speak. "I've come home," Luma said, and placed the lantern in Elian's hands. "But not to stay, just to return what I carried." Elian opened the lantern. Inside, resting on a bed of moss, was a single stone, the same stone she had carried away all those years ago. But now, it was covered in carvings, teeny symbols, etched over time. Names of people, places, circles formed, gardens sown, tears shed and gathered like rain, laughter shared like bread. "It belongs here now," she said. "Where it began." Elian placed the lantern beneath the old oak tree at the center of the quiet heart. Around it, the other stones leaned inward, as if recognizing their kin. Luma sat down beside them. Murray joined her. Ben Elian. No one spoke for a long time. The wind played with the grass. The trees sang their green song, and far above, the first stars blinked gently into view. Later that night, they built a small fire. Luma told stories not of heroism or miracles, but of small things. A shoemaker who began to hum again after years of silence. A boy who taught a village to sit in a circle without speaking. A grandmother who remembered how to say, "I am sorry," by planting violets near her doorstep. They all thought the quiet was outside of them, Luma said, staring into the flames. But it was in them all along. They just needed somewhere to remember. "And you gave them that," Maria said. "No," Luma replied gently. "You gave it to me." She looked at Elian. "You slept through the storm so I could learn how to stand in it." And Elian's eyes shining, simply said, "Thank you for waking up." The next morning, Luma rose before the sun. She didn't wake them. She left a note by the window, pressed with a dried bluebell. "There are more places the quiet must reach, but I will return again when the wind begins to listen." And by the time the sky turned soft with dawn light, she had vanished once more. But the grass where she walked now shimmered faintly, and the lantern beneath the oak glowed on, no longer alone, but surrounded by other lights. A circle, a memory, a beginning that never ended. In the valley, it exhaled, a deep, slow, grateful breath, because it knew that wherever the storm might return, the quiet had already arrived first. Okay, let's talk about the quiet herd for a second. Do you think Elian and Mari were afraid when they heard the storm coming? When they realized it was time to go inside, did they seek shelter? Did they hold each other close and wait for the wind to pass? What do you think? Also, how did Luma feel when she got back to the quiet heart? How do you think she felt seeing Elian and knowing that she was home? If you liked this story, be sure to leave us a like. If you want more stories like these, subscribe and then listen to another story. Thanks for listening. This is a story about listening to stories, to yourself, to your dreams, and to the magic that lies dormant in every bit of creation. If you love that, then please subscribe and join us on this journey. Far from the valley, past the wheat-touched plains and the mountains that scraped the sky, there stood a town where everything was loud. Trains roared through the center at dawn. Machines breathed heavy and hot behind factory walls. Cars groaned across crumbling roads. Even the wind seemed restless, scraping over rooftops like it had forgotten how to rest. In the middle of this town lived a boy named Kale. He was small for his age, thin, quiet, and never without a notebook in his hand, a battered little thing filled with unfinished songs and shapes he could never explain. Kale didn't speak much, not because he couldn't, but because the world never stopped long enough to hear. No one noticed when he walked. No one asked why he always stared at the sky like he might apologize. The noise of the town didn't leave room for softness, and so Kale grew used to carrying his wonder in silence, like a lantern without a flame. Then one afternoon, the sky broke open. Not in thunder, not in storm, but in a sudden, hushed light like the world had blinked and, for just a moment, remembered how to be still. Kale was walking behind the old train yard, where weeds grew tall and stubborn, when he saw a garden tucked between two crumbling buildings. Wildflowers and cracked concrete, a ring of stones surrounding a low bench made of driftwood, and at the center of it all, half buried in dirt, was an old bronze bell. The air there was different, cool, weightless, like stepping into a forgotten breath. Kale knelt beside the bell. Something was carved into its side knot, in letters he recognized, but in simple marks. Circles, spirals, stars, the same symbols he'd been drawing in his notebook for years, without knowing why. He reached out and touched the bell. It made no sound, but in his chest, something rang, a memory he didn't remember having, a voice he didn't recognize, saying, "Even here, the quiet grows." Kale returned every day. He brought seeds, watered the flowers, sat on the bench with his notebook open and waited for something he couldn't name. People passed him, puzzled, dismissive. But a few stopped. A tired woman sat beside him one evening and cried without a word. An old man left a piece of bread on the stone. A little girl came and danced barefoot in the weeds. Something had begun, a silence, but not an emptiness. A space. One night, Kale dreamed of a girl in a blue cloak with a lantern in her hand. She stood in a garden much like his, surrounded by wind that sang instead of screamed. She placed something into his palm, a single, smooth stone. "Take this," she said. "There are others." When he woke, the stone was there, real cool, etched with the same spiral as the bell. He ran to the garden. But now, he noticed things he hadn't before. Tiny carvings in the stones, marks from different places, names in unfamiliar alphabets, symbols like musical notes, feathers, waves, seeds. He understood then. This garden had been planted long before him, by someone who knew how to carry quiet, someone who had left the bell not to be rung but to be remembered. He placed the stone gently beside it, then opened his notebook. And for the first time, the song that had been waiting found its way through his hands. He wrote, and wrote, and wrote, not to be heard, but to listen back, far away. In the valley, Moray stood at the edge of the old oak tree. The lantern beneath it pulsed softly. Elian stepped beside her. "Another hearth?" he asked. She nodded. "They're lighting now, without our help," he smiled. "That's how we'll know it's working." Beneath the stormy sky that once wept and wailed, a quiet wind passed over the hills. It carried seeds from gardens unknown, words from letters never sent, and songs from children who no longer needed silence to fill safe-only space. Kale spent hours in his garden, watching clouds take shape in the vast sky, feeling the earth beneath him, breathing with the rustle of leaves. One day, a new family moved into the house, across the tracks. 2 parents, 3 children. As soon as they were settled, the mother came to him with a list of sounds her youngest had heard. The whistling pipes, the creaking stairs, the sighing wind. "Are they dangerous? Should we move again?" Kale felt the weight of her worry and took her hand. "These are just sounds," he said. "Like the wind makes music. The pipes sing their songs. They aren't dangerous, only lonely. And sometimes lonely can be sad, but mostly it wants company." So he did what he could. He showed the children the best hiding spots amongst the weeds. He taught them how to read the language of birds. He told them stories of faraway lands, of brave knights, and fire-breathing dragons. He gave them names for the feelings they couldn't place, showed them how to become part of the music. That spring, the garden bloomed with new life. Dandelions and daisies, poppies and pansies, irises reaching up to touch the sky. The children laughed, chased butterflies, and skipped rope between the tall weeds, while Kale watched, a smile touching his lips for the first time in a long while. Then summer came, bringing with it the rumble of thunder and the blinding flash of lightning. One night, a violent windstorm swept across the town, tearing shingles off roofs, snapping branches, and shaking the walls of houses until their foundations cried out. terrified. The family huddled together, listening to the howling wind. The next morning, they crept outside to find the garden unrecognizable, the wildflowers crushed, the bell knocked from its stone stand, the bench overturned, the glass from the greenhouse shattered at their feet. The little girl ran to Kale, tears streaming down her face. "What have we done?" she cried. "We brought the storm." Kale knelt beside her, his hand warm on her shoulder. "No," he said, "storms don't come from us. They come from inside. But it's up to us to teach them how to dance." Together, they gathered the fallen flowers, pulled weeds, and set the bench right side up. By nightfall, the rain had stopped, the clouds thinned, and the stars peeked shyly through the dark. Later that week, Kale stood beside the riverbank, watching the water turn from brown to clear. A heron landed on the stones nearby, its feathers ruffled by the wind. Beside him, the little girl dipped her toes in the shallow water. "The garden doesn't look like it did before," she said quietly. Kale smiled. "And yet it's more beautiful than ever. The flowers are tougher now, their roots stronger. They won't be blown away. So is a—" He looked at the girl, her hair tangled by the wind, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Do you think we're like the flowers?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Maybe," she whispered. "If we're strong enough, we can weather any storm." Kale squeezed her hand. "Yes," he said. "If we're strong enough." From somewhere deep within him, the memory stirred, a whisper of ancient words, a song of quiet strength. He closed his eyes and began to hum. The melody flowed through him, connecting to something vast and eternal. The wind carried his song away, weaving it into the rustling leaves and the babbling brook, sending it dancing through the tall grasses and over the hills to the distant valley where a great oak tree stood, sending us against the changing seasons. At its roots, a faint light flickered. A girl with hair like spun moonlight and eyes the color of twilight opened her gaze to the heavens. Her lips moved silently, forming words of power and peace. The lantern in her hand glowed brighter. Her heart beat in time with the song that echoed from beyond the hills, growing stronger with each note, swelling with each verse. Years went by. The garden thrived, becoming a haven for the townspeople, a sanctuary of calm in a sea of noise. Kale, older now, but with the same gentle eyes, watched the people come and go, sharing their laughter and their tears. He tended the bell, polished its surface until it shone like a beacon, its music echoing faintly in his soul. One day, he looked up to see the weathered face of the old man from before, leaning on his stick beside the bench. "I remember when this town had only silence," the old man said, his voice raspy with age. Kale turned and smiled. "Me too," he whispered, remembering the quiet strength that had bloomed in his chest all those years ago. "Me too." That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this story about finding beauty in unexpected places and the courage to nurture it despite the challenges around you. If you liked this story, please show your support. And if you have a story you'd like to share or an idea for a future episode, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening and for joining us in our mission to bring magical stories to ears everywhere. Until next time, may your days be filled with the music of joy and the magic of listening. Take care and goodbye. When the story is over, clap your hands once and the world will end. When the story is over, clap your hands twice and the world will begin again. The valley had always known how to keep still, but on this day, it welcomed stillness, not as solitude but as return. From every direction they came, travelers, listeners, carriers of quiet. Some arrived on foot, following the winding river that led to the meadow. Others came by cart or horse, or walked barefoot over hills, soft with moss. A few sailed up the misty stream that flowed into the southern mouth of the valley, guided not by compass, but by memory. Each one bore something in their hands: a folded songbook, a smooth stone, a candle burned low but still lit, a wooden carving etched with unfamiliar stars, a bell, silent, wrapped in cloth. They had not been summoned, only remembered, and that was enough. Elian and Murray stood at the edge of the garden as the first travelers arrived. They had widened the ring around the old oak tree, cleared more space beside the listening path, and added benches made from fallen branches and river-polished stone. There were no banners, no speeches, no list of names, just a long table beneath the sky, laid with bread, leaves, herbs, and honey, and a circle of firelight waiting to be shared. They called it the Echo Gathering, though no one had spoken the name aloud. It had arrived, like most things in this place, by listening. That first night, they did not speak much. They sat together. The air carried warmth from the fire and the scent of pine and lavender. Children lay in the grass, tracing the stars with their fingers. Grown-ups, once hardened by noise and survival, softened in the hush. And then someone began to hum. It was an old woman from the Salt Coast, her eyes bright with sea weather. The melody was nothing anyone recognized, and yet it belonged to them all. Others joined, slowly, not with words, but with tones, deep, rising, layered like dusk upon dusk. The valley became an instrument, and for the first time since the first storm, the quiet sang back. Over the next days, stories bloomed like wildflowers. Cale stood before the others and told of his half-buried bell, of the strangers who cried and stayed, and the boy who once could not speak, but now named Stars. A girl from the northern ridgelands whispered a tale of sitting in silence with a mourning widow for 22 days, until the woman placed her hand on the earth and said, "I can breathe again." A pair of brothers told how they built a bench in the center of a noisy city, inviting people to sit and simply listen to the wind. Every story ended not in applause but in stillness, the kind of stillness that holds a flame without smothering it. Murray walked among them like a breeze in green leaves, touching shoulders, laying fresh herbs at the feet of those who wept without knowing why. Elian listened, his eyes always half closed, as if hearing something not just in the voice, but in the space between words. On the third day, someone asked, "Where is Lynn?" Elian pointed to the lantern beneath the tree. "She's here. In every quiet you brought," and they understood. Not all keepers must remain. Some must walk planting hush where the storm once screamed, leaving gardens instead of monuments, stones instead of flags. That night, they lit lanterns around the garden, not with oil or fire, but with soft crystals that glowed from within, gifted by a traveler from the far eastern forests. Each lantern was placed beside a story, and the garden bloomed not with petals but with memory. They did not call it an ending. They called it a circle closing just wide enough to become another beginning. And in the dark sky above, thunder rolled far off, not in warning, in greeting. The storm had not gone. It had simply learned to approach more gently. As dawn rose on the fourth day, each traveler knelt in the grass and pressed their hands to the earth. No vows were spoken, no map was drawn, but the valley had marked them in the soles of their feet, in the rhythm of their breath, in the song they would carry to far places. One by one, they left again, but this time, the quiet did not remain behind. It walked with them, in every hush, in every patient ear, in every pause that allowed the world to begin again. In the days that followed, the travelers scattered across the land. Some moved like water, slipping through fingers, leaving no trace. Others walked like trees, rooted and reaching, bearing witness to sky and weather. Still others moved like mountains, settling stone by stone, shaping the very earth to echo their passing. Where the travelers went, light took root. Where light took root, hush grew strong. Even when the wind shifted, even when doubt took wing, the light endured, for it had been born in stillness and tended by the patient hands of memory. Before long, the travelers spoke not only in whispers, but in songs, with voices strengthened by silence. They wove tales of the valley, of its sheltering arms and whispering wisdom. Those who heard the songs felt a stirring deep within, a remembering of something long forgotten. They, too, had known stillness once, and the world had been whole. Now the songs traveled beyond hills and hollows, across rivers and plains, to places where the echoes of the valley had never reached. And so it was that the keepers of quiet returned to a world that was both changed and unchanged. They found bustling cities grown weary of their clamor. They saw farmlands parched by endless demands. They met weathered elders ready to pass on their stories. The travelers sat beside roaring waterfalls, beside rushing paths, and beside the quiet ones. They offered them the peace they had found and the strength to tend their own inner gardens. Some accepted readily, touched by the travelers' radiant eyes and gentle words. Others hesitated, clinging to anger or fear or grief. Yet even these could not resist the light blooming steadily within the travelers, nor the promise held in the hush of their hands. Then the travelers moved on, leaving seeds of stillness in hearts and minds. Where the seeds fell on fertile ground, hush took root, gardens bloomed. In the cities, new pathways opened away from the clamor of commerce and toward hidden groves, where sunlight dappled the grass. In the farmlands, parched hands sank into cool soil and felt not just nourishment for crops, but healing for spirits. Around fires in the hills, elders passed down stories, not just of ancestors, but of the travelers and the miraculous valley that birthed them anew. Wherever the travelers went, the light spread, weaving a tapestry of calm across the land. The noise did not cease, the demands did not vanish, but within many hearts, a well of stillness grew, offering solace and strength in every season. Here's our summary of The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This is a fantasy novel based loosely on Russian folklore and fairy tale, featuring characters inspired by figures from Slavic mythology. It's the first book in the Winter Night trilogy. In medieval Russia, a young woman named Vasia Yegorova is desperate to save her family and village from a terrible curse brought on by her increasingly cruel and ruthless stepmother, who has banned all magic and traditional beliefs in order to replace them with Christianity. However, she lives in a world where magical creatures known as the Finnic people dwell in the forests and hunt evil spirits, and they believe that Vasia is the reincarnation of the goddess who must embrace her powers to save the land from an ancient evil known as the Winter King. Meanwhile, Vasia struggles with feelings of unworthiness and self-doubt, and so she turns to her grandmother for help, who teaches her about her heritage and shows her how to harness her innate abilities. But she soon learns that her power can only be realized once she accepts the darkest parts of herself. And so, while Vasia trains to become the hero that her village needs, she is confronted by a terrifying enemy in the form of a mysterious and seductive ice wizard named Morozov. Vasia and Morozov eventually fight a great battle in which Vasia discovers the true source of her power. In the end, Vasia defeats Morozov and breaks the winter that has cursed her village. And although she loses her grandmother in the process, she accepts her role as the new protector of her people and saves her family from their stepmother's tyranny. It's the story of a young girl coming into her own power, of good versus evil, and a celebration of Russian culture and folklore. Now let's get into some interesting facts about the author and the book. The author, Katherine Arden, is an American author of fantasy novels. Her debut novel, The Bear and the Nightingale, was published in 2017 and was nominated for a World Fantasy Award. Her second novel in the Winter Night trilogy, The Girl in the Tower, was published in 2019. Both novels have been New York Times bestsellers. Arden received her BA from Columbia University and her MFA from the University of Michigan. She currently lives in Wisconsin with her husband and son. Number 2. Katherine Arden said that writing this book was a labor of love. She fell in love with Russia and its culture while studying abroad during college, and she wanted to write a book that paid homage to the beauty and magic of the country. She particularly wanted to highlight the Russian wilderness, which she describes as vast, wild, and otherworldly. No. 3. This book is heavily influenced by Russian folklore and mythology. Arden did extensive research on Russian fairy tales and legends in order to craft a story that was both exciting and authentic. She was particularly interested in the figure of Baba Yaga, the witch who lives in a hut that stands on chicken legs. In the book, Auden draws on the traditional stories of Baba Yaga in order to create a complex and nuanced character who serves as both a mentor and a challenge to Vassia. Number 4. Auden's portrayal of Vassia as a reluctant hero is another key element of the novel. Vassia is not your typical fantasy protagonist. She is not a warrior or a leader by nature, but rather a shy and unassuming young woman who is thrust into a world of magic and danger. However, through her journey, she learns to embrace her power and find her place in the world. No, the relationship between Vassia and Morozov is also a fascinating aspect of the novel. Their initial interactions are marked by fear and mistrust, but over time, they develop a complex and passionate relationship that defies easy. Morozov is a powerful and seductive ice wizard who represents both danger and temptation for Vassia. His presence challenges her beliefs and values, forcing her to confront the darkness within herself. No, the novel explores themes of tradition versus modernity, faith versus reason, and the importance of embracing one's heritage. Vassia's conflict with her stepmother, who represents the forces of modernity and religious orthodoxy, highlights the tension between tradition and change. Vassia's struggle to preserve her cultural heritage and embrace her magical powers symbolizes the broader clash between old ways of life and the pressures of modernization. No. 7. The use of magic in the novel is also noteworthy. Auden creates a rich and detailed system of magic that is deeply rooted in the natural world. Vassia's ability to communicate with animals, control the elements, and heal the sick reflects the deep connection between humans and the natural world that is central to Russian folklore. Number 8. Finally, The Bear and the Nightingale is a captivating read that will appeal to fans of fantasy. The story is fast-paced and action-packed with plenty of twists and turns to keep readers on the edge of their seats. The characters are well-developed and relatable, and the world-building is immersive and believable. If you're looking for a book that will transport you to a world of magic and wonder, then I highly recommend The Bear and the Nightingale. So let's move on to our main topic, the short story titled The Quiet. This story was published in 2015 and was adapted into the Netflix series Lock and Key. It follows a young boy named Bode, who moves into his father's ancestral home, called the Key House, after his father is killed in a home invasion. Along with his sister and mother, Bode explores the house and discovers magical keys that unlock not only the secrets of the house, but also the powers that lie within him. Let's start by exploring the title of the story, The Quiet. On the surface, the title seems to refer to the quiet town of Harmony, where the story is set. Harmony is a small, secluded town that has been cut off from the rest of the world for many years. The townspeople have created a bubble of safety and seclusion, but it comes at a cost. The characters in the story are trapped in a cycle of fear and repression, unable to break free from the expectations and traditions of their past. However, the title, The Quiet, can also be interpreted more broadly as a metaphor for the repressed emotions and memories that drive the plot of the story. The characters in the story have buried their pasts in order to survive. They have put their fears, griefs, and traumas out of their minds in order to move forward. But these repressed emotions come back to haunt them in the form of the home invader, who represents the darkness that lies beneath the surface of their seemingly idyllic town. Another important symbol in the story is the key house itself. The house is a character in the story, a living entity that reacts to the emotions and intentions of those who enter it. It has been watching over the Locke family for generations, waiting for someone to come along who can unlock its secrets and restore balance to the town. Bode is the chosen one, the key to unlocking the house's power and breaking the cycle of fear that has held Harmony hostage for so long. One of the major themes of the story is the importance of facing your fears in order to move forward. Throughout the story, the characters are forced to confront the demons of their past and the darkness that lies within themselves. They learn that the only way to overcome their fears is to acknowledge them and find a way to integrate them into their lives. The home invader serves as a catalyst for this process, forcing the characters to face their deepest fears head-on. and find a way to overcome them. Another important theme in the story is the power of family and legacy. The Locke family has a long and complicated history with the town of Harmony and with the house. Each member of the family brings their own baggage and secrets to the story, but they are ultimately bound together by their love for each other and their determination to protect one another. The story explores the complexities of family relationships and the lasting impact of the past on the present. The characters in the story are well developed and relatable. We have Bode, the curious and imaginative young boy who discovers the magical keys. Then we have Kinsey, his older sister, who initially dismisses the magical elements of the story, but who eventually comes to accept and embrace them. There's also Nina, their mother, who is struggling to cope with the trauma of her past and the death of her husband. And then there's the enigmatic Gabe, who serves as a guide and mentor to Bode as he discovers the secrets of the house. Overall, The Quiet is a gripping and thought-provoking story that explores the depths of human emotion and the power of the past to shape the present. It is a story about facing your fears, embracing your emotions, and the importance of family and legacy. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and check out our other videos.